Most people don't lose relationships because they weren't loved. They lose them because they became too available, too predictable, and too easy to replace. And here's the truth: no one tells you. People don't come back because you chase them. They come back when they feel your absence and your value at the same time. If you don't understand this, you'll keep repeating the same relationship cycle with different people. Attraction is often misunderstood as something that grows through comfort, stability, and predictability. While those elements are important for maintaining a long-term relationship, they are not what create attraction in the first place. Attraction is driven by emotional tension, the space between certainty and uncertainty, between knowing and not fully knowing. It's this tension that keeps people mentally and emotionally engaged. In the early stages of a connection, emotional tension exists naturally. You don't fully know where you stand with the other person. There's curiosity about how they feel, what they're thinking, and what might happen next. This uncertainty creates anticipation, and anticipation fuels attraction. You find yourself thinking about them more, analyzing interactions, and looking forward to the next moment of contact. The emotional experience feels alive because there's something at stake. The problem begins when people try to replace this tension with immediate comfort. They reveal everything too quickly, become fully available, and remove all unpredictability. Instead of allowing the connection to develop gradually, they rush to secure it. They text constantly, seek reassurance, and make their presence so consistent that there's no longer any mystery. When that happens, the emotional tension disappears. Without tension, the mind disengages. There's nothing left to figure out, no uncertainty to resolve, no challenge to overcome. The other person starts to feel predictable, and predictability, while safe, is not stimulating. The excitement that once existed begins to fade, not because the person is no longer valuable, but because the emotional experience has flattened. Emotional tension also creates a sense of value. When something is not fully guaranteed, it feels more significant. People naturally invest more attention and energy into what they feel they could lose. When you are always available and fully certain, that sense of potential loss disappears. The interaction becomes routine rather than meaningful. This doesn't mean creating confusion or playing games. It means maintaining a level of independence and emotional control. You have your own priorities, your own pace, and your own boundaries. You don't rush to fill every silence or answer every question immediately. You allow space for the other person to think about you, to miss you, and to come toward you. Attraction grows in that space where emotions are not fully settled, where interest is clear but not completely predictable, and where both people feel engaged in discovering each other rather than simply having access to one another at all times. Scarcity increases perceived value because people are wired to pay more attention to what feels limited, uncertain, or not fully guaranteed. In relationships, this plays out through availability, attention, and emotional access. When something is always there, always predictable, and always within reach, the mind stops assigning it the same level of importance. In the beginning of most connections, scarcity exists naturally. You don't have full access to the other person's time, energy, or attention. There are gaps between interactions, moments of wondering, and a sense that their presence is not guaranteed. That limitation creates focus. You notice them more, think about them more, and place more value on each interaction because it feels like something you could lose. As the dynamic shifts, many people unintentionally remove that scarcity. They become constantly available, always responding immediately, always initiating, and always accommodating. What was once something to be experienced in moments becomes something that is continuously accessible. The emotional impact changes. Instead of feeling like something meaningful, the interaction becomes expected. When access is unlimited, effort decreases. The human mind doesn't feel the need to pursue or protect something that feels secure without investment. This is not a conscious decision, it's a behavioral pattern. People naturally allocate more attention to what feels uncertain or at risk of being lost. When that sense disappears, so does a portion of the emotional engagement. Scarcity also influences respect. When someone sees that your time and energy are not given freely to everyone, they begin to recognize that access to you has value. It signals that you have standards, priorities, and a life outside of them. On the other hand, when you make yourself constantly available, regardless of how the other person behaves, it communicates that your attention has no cost. Over time, this can lead to reduced effort and decreased appreciation. This doesn't mean withholding attention in a manipulative way. It means maintaining a life that does not revolve entirely around another person. You have responsibilities, goals, and boundaries that naturally limit your availability. You don't abandon your priorities to respond instantly or to maintain constant communication. Your presence is consistent, but not excessive. When your attention is given in measured, intentional ways rather than constantly, it retains its impact. Each interaction carries weight because it is not diluted by overexposure. The other person remains engaged because there is still something to anticipate, something to earn, and something that feels valuable rather than guaranteed. People place more value on what requires effort, investment, and patience. When something is earned, it carries meaning because time, energy, and emotion were exchanged to obtain it. In relationships, this principle shows up clearly in how respect and attraction develop over time. If someone has to show consistency, make decisions, and prove their intentions, they become more attached to the outcome because they've contributed to building it. When everything is given too easily, that process is skipped. If attention, affection, commitment, and emotional access are offered without any real effort from the other person, there's nothing for them to invest in. Without investment, there's no sense of ownership or responsibility toward maintaining the connection. It feels convenient rather than meaningful. This is why overgiving early on often backfires. Constant texting, immediate availability, emotional openness without boundaries, and prioritizing someone who hasn't yet proven themselves can create an imbalance. One person is doing most of the work, while the other simply receives. Over time, the one receiving starts to take it for granted, not necessarily out of bad intention, but because there was no effort required to obtain it. Effort creates emotional attachment. When someone has to think about what to say, plan time together, adjust their schedule, or show consistency, they begin to associate their own actions with the value of the relationship. The more they invest, the more they care about the outcome. This is how respect is built, not through words, but through participation. When there is no challenge, there is no growth in the connection. If everything is already secured from the beginning, the natural process of building attraction is interrupted. The other person doesn't feel the need to step up, improve, or prove anything. As a result, their level of respect often stays low because they never had to rise to a higher standard. Boundaries play a key role in this dynamic. When you have clear limits on your time, energy, and emotional availability, you create a structure where the other person has to meet you at a certain level. They can't simply access everything without demonstrating effort. This encourages them to engage more intentionally and take the connection seriously. Respect is closely tied to how much someone feels they've earned their place in your life. When access to you requires consistency, patience, and genuine effort, it naturally increases how much they value both you and the relationship. Emotional self-control is magnetic because it signals stability, confidence, and internal strength. In relationships, people are naturally drawn to those who are grounded in their emotions rather than controlled by them. When someone can manage how they feel without becoming reactive, impulsive, or overwhelmed, it creates a sense of calm that others find attractive. Most people operate on emotional impulse. When they feel anxious, they seek reassurance immediately. When they feel ignored, they react with frustration. When they feel uncertain, they try to force clarity. These reactions are understandable, but they often communicate a lack of control. Instead of creating connection, they create pressure. The other person begins to feel responsible for managing those emotions, which can become exhausting over time. Emotional self-control changes that dynamic completely. Instead of reacting instantly, you pause. You observe what you're feeling without letting it dictate your behavior. This creates space between the emotion and the response. In that space, you make decisions that are intentional rather than reactive. That alone shifts how others perceive you. When you don't chase immediate validation, your presence feels more secure. You're not constantly seeking attention or reassurance, which makes your interactions feel lighter and more balanced. The other person doesn't feel pressured to meet emotional demands, and that allows them to engage more naturally. Attraction often grows in environments where there is freedom, not pressure. Self-control also creates unpredictability in a healthy way. If someone knows exactly how you will react every time, especially if those reactions are emotional or intense, they begin to lose curiosity. But when your responses are measured and composed, it keeps the interaction steady without becoming predictable. This balance maintains engagement without creating instability. Another key aspect is that emotional control reflects self-respect. It shows that you value your own state of mind enough not to let external situations dictate it. You don't overreact to delayed messages, mixed signals, or temporary uncertainty. Instead, you remain consistent in how you show up. That consistency builds trust while maintaining attraction. People also tend to mirror emotional states. If you are calm and composed, it often encourages the other person to meet you at that level. If you are reactive and emotionally volatile, it can either push them away or pull them into a similar pattern. Emotional self-control sets the tone for the interaction without needing to force anything. Over time, this kind of presence stands out. In a world where many people react quickly and emotionally, being someone who remains steady creates a different kind of impact. It draws people in because it feels safe, controlled, and quietly confident without needing to prove anything through words or intensity. Self-worth dictates relationship dynamics because it shapes what you accept, what you tolerate, and what you believe you deserve. Every interaction in a relationship is influenced by the standards you set for yourself. Whether you're aware of it or not, people respond to how you carry your value, not just how you express it. When someone has strong self-worth, their behavior reflects it naturally. They don't chase validation, overextend themselves, or ignore red flags just to keep someone interested. They take their time, observe actions, and make decisions based on consistency rather than temporary emotions. This creates a dynamic where respect is established early because the other person understands that access to them is not automatic. On the other hand, low self-worth often leads to overcompensation. A person may give too much too soon, hoping it will secure the connection. They may tolerate inconsistent behavior, lack of effort, or unclear intentions because they fear losing the relationship. Instead of setting boundaries, they adjust themselves to fit the other person. Over time, this creates an imbalance where one person is investing heavily while the other contributes very little. That imbalance becomes the dynamic. The person who gives more starts to feel undervalued, while the person who gives less begins to take things for granted, not necessarily out of bad intention, but because the structure of the relationship allows it. When there are no consequences for low effort continues. This is how self-worth silently defines the quality of the relationship. Self-worth also affects how you respond to challenges. When something feels off, a person with strong self-worth addresses it calmly or steps back if needed. They don't ignore discomfort just to maintain temporary peace. They understand that protecting their standards is more important than holding on to a situation that doesn't meet them. Boundaries are a direct reflection of self-worth. They are not about controlling the other person, but about defining what behavior you accept. When those boundaries are clear and consistently upheld, they shape how the other person engages with you. It creates a dynamic where mutual respect becomes necessary for the relationship to continue. Over time, people adjust to the level of access and treatment you allow. If your standards are low, the relationship will reflect that. If your standards are high and consistent, the relationship will either rise to meet them or fall away. Absence creates clarity because distance removes emotional noise and forces people to confront what they truly feel rather than what they're used to. When someone is constantly present in your life, texting, calling, showing up, it becomes easy to confuse familiarity with genuine value. You get used to their presence, and instead of consciously appreciating it, you begin to expect it. When that presence is suddenly reduced or removed, the dynamic shifts. The routine is broken. The emotional space they once filled becomes noticeable. This is when clarity begins to form, because the mind starts to evaluate the situation without constant reinforcement. You're no longer reacting to ongoing interaction. You're reflecting on what it actually meant. For the person who steps away, absence creates clarity by removing emotional dependency. When you're constantly engaged with someone, your mood can become tied to their behavior. A delayed message, a change in tone, or a shift in attention can affect how you feel. Stepping back allows you to reset. You regain control over your emotional state and begin to see the relationship more objectively rather than through moment-to-moment reactions. For the other person, absence creates contrast. When you're always available, Your presence blends into the background. It becomes part of their routine rather than something they actively value. But when you're no longer there in the same way, the difference becomes clear. They notice what's missing: your attention, your energy, your consistency. This contrast often leads to reflection on how much you actually contributed to their emotional experience. Absence also removes pressure. Constant interaction can sometimes create tension, especially if the dynamic has become unbalanced or emotionally charged. Space allows both people to process without immediate reaction. Instead of responding out of habit or emotion, they begin to think more carefully about what they want and how they feel. Clarity comes from seeing patterns without distraction. When you're not caught in continuous communication, you can evaluate the relationship based on actions over time rather than isolated moments. You start to recognize whether the connection was mutual, whether effort was balanced, and whether your needs were being met. This process often reveals truths that were easy to ignore when emotions were constantly active. It shows whether the connection had real substance or was simply maintained by proximity and routine, and whether the absence feels like relief, confusion, or genuine loss. The right relationship isn't built on chasing, convincing, or holding someone in place. It's built on who you become. When your self-worth is solid, you stop overgiving. When your emotions are controlled, you stop overreacting. When your life has direction, you stop making someone else your center, and that changes everything. You don't attract people by proving your value, you attract them by living in it. The goal is not to find someone who won't leave. The goal is to become someone who doesn't lose themselves when others do. Because when you reach that point, you don't fear losing people. You simply stop choosing the ones who don't see your worth.